Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Our guest today is State Senator Eric Brakey. Eric represents District 20 in the Maine State Senate. He also manages financial records for Brakey Energy, a family-run business that helps industrial clients to lower energy costs and increase energy efficiency. In his spare time, Eric Brakey enjoys acting. Today we discuss the greatest crisis facing our country. To find out more about Eric Brakey and his campaign, visit Brakey for Senate, that is BRAKEY for Senate.com. Hi, Eric. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio and our Heartbeat of the World segment. We're so grateful to have you here today.
Well, I'm so glad to be on today. Thank you for having me.
You betcha. Thanks for staying on there with a little bit of technical difficulties, as often happens with technology, but we're glad to have you here. You're doing awesome work in Maine as a senator, and you're going to talk to us today. The reason we started this segment, Heartbeat of the World, was really to bring citizens together to have a conversation that was constructive, as you might have guessed after the last presidential election. Anything but constructive conversations were going on around the country where people are screaming and hollering about their favorite team, but not really listening to each other. And at the end of the day, we all want the same things. We want a country where we can live our best life. So share with the audience a little bit about your background. What brought you into the wonderful world of politics?
Well, I think, calling it a wonderful world is certainly generous. But I got started, I got started as a young person, fresh out of college, 21 years old in 2010 in the Tea Party wave. So I was graduating college and stepping out into the world. There was a huge concern at the time, as you may remember, about the huge national debt. It was $13 trillion. And at the time, of course, we thought that was a pretty big number. Of course, now looking back on it these days, it seems like those were the good old days. Those were $21 trillion in debt now, and we have $113 trillion in unfunded liabilities. But, for me back then, it was really a moment where I finally, things crystallized in my mind. And I saw that, I'd always grown up in a household where Fox News was on TV and Rush Limbaugh was on the radio. And I really kind of just believed the establishment Republican line. But it was a moment where I realized that, they've always told me the Democrats are the problem and the Republicans are the good guys. And I just realized, it's both the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington, D.C., the establishment in both parties that have created these problems for us, that have spent us into huge debts, that have eroded our constitutional rights and our constitutional liberties. So that's that. In that moment, I decided to get involved as a young person because I knew that this was a bleak future that my generation was potentially inheriting. I got involved in 2011, 2012 as a grassroots activist for a certain guy running for president, a congressman from Texas named Congressman Ron Paul. He seemed to be the only person coming forward with serious solutions to get spending under control and restore our Constitution. That's where I got involved. I kind of went on from there, ended up running for state Senate 2 years later. And I've served in the state Senate now for 2 terms, 4 years. And now I'm a candidate. I'm the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate here in Maine.
Wow. And it's true. I love that you bring that up because I've heard so many people talk about, my team, this team, that team. And really, at the end of the day, as we've both seen, I say to people, I'm tending to see a pattern in this country where it'll be like 1 or 2 turns Republican, then we switch to Democrats. And just before that new person takes office, this is it. They're going to fix our country. It's all going to be better now. And then it's not. And then we go back to the other side, the other team, and then the same thing happened. They're going to be the masters that fix everything. And it was a great book I read, a guy who is conservative, an activist politician, who said, really, at this date and time, it really takes every citizen fighting for liberty and the problems and issues in our country, and not just looking for that one superstar person that's going to make everything better, because they can't.
Right. We really need to remember it's not about party. It's got to be about policy and principle. And, it seems like so often if we lose sight of that and we're just voting for the party, regardless of what those people actually are going to do when they get there, sometimes we end up with 2 choices. One who is sending our country towards a cliff at 100 miles an hour, and one's that's sending our country towards a cliff at 80 miles an hour. It's like either way, we're going in the wrong direction. We're losing our liberties. We're losing our freedom, our Constitution, and we're being sold into huge debt. Right now with all the debts and unfunded liabilities, it comes out to a bill of $1 million for every single American taxpayer across this country. We have some big problems in this country, and we gotta turn this around. We gotta stop heading towards that cliff.
Wow. And I like that you bring this up. What's interesting to me is I'm in New York now. I live in Brooklyn, but more and more I talk to people about their senator, their congressman, or, the mayor. And what are you happy about? What are you not happy about? And a lot of times they're not happy with the people that are incumbents, and they get elected every single time back to the same office. And I'm like, if you're not happy, how do they keep on getting the same chair? And I've made a concerted effort to, kind of really go deeply into understanding who's actually running. Do they stand for my values? And if not, I'm voting them out, or I'm putting down someone else on the ticket. But often, if they aren't a so-called career politician and haven't been there forever, people just vote in who's already there, even though they're not happy with them. Why does this happen?
Well, I think as you poll people, Congress has very low approval ratings. Mm-hmm. But everyone hates Congress, but they love their congressmen. And that's the problem. That's why these folks keep getting reelected. It's because, at the end of the day, politicians are professional, nice people. That's what they do. Their job is to get you to like them. And they do a very good job of that. That's why people get reelected, because they may hate every other congressman, but that congressman has done something for them. But, it's not that the people in Congress are particularly bad people. They're not bad people. They're people trying to do the best that they know how. The problem is that they lack real solid principles. They don't understand what the principles of freedom and liberty that this country was built on. And it becomes so easy. I've seen it in government myself. When all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And when people bring real legitimate problems to you in government, you think, well, geez, we got to fix this problem. But the only tool you have is government. And government cannot be the solution for every problem in our country. In fact, the government solutions that are often come up with make the problems even worse most of the time.
Wow. And I would also think more financially, and cost a lot more for the people. Now, what is your solution? That we take it to a state level and that each individual state be responsible for issues and such?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a very big part of the solution. That's what our country was built on. The idea that we weren't going to have power centralized in one city. Our founders knew that that's how political power becomes corrupted. And that's what we've seen happen. We increasingly put more and more power in the hands of Washington, D.C., issuing out one-size-fits-all solutions for all the hundreds of millions of people in this country, from Maine to California and every state in between, and it isn't working. We are a very culturally diverse country. We are so different across the many states, and that's why our founders believed that our country was going to work if we allowed the states to be the laboratories of innovation. Rather than imposing things from the top down, let Maine have our own policies in Maine, and New York have their own policies, and Texas and California. People can have their own policies. We don't need to do things in a one-size-fits-all way, because we're not one-size-fits-all people. And the benefit of that, not only does it make it more difficult for the special interests to buy off all the fonts of power across this country when it's spread out and decentralized, but also it allows us to experiment and try different things. So, for example, I'm a free market conservative. I believe in economic freedom all the way through. A state like Vermont, they've often said that they want to do single-payer healthcare, government-run healthcare. I think that would fail. I think that would be a disaster. But it's their right to do it. And if they do it and it falls apart, there's a lesson we can all learn from that.
So you're right. Then it allows each state to take on new initiative, try new things. It doesn't work. Okay, we don't do that. We try again. It allows you to be flexible and see what works, what doesn't work, and then cross correct and do it again.
Right. As long as we don't have to bail them out when they make poor decisions.
Yeah. Now, why has it become so much of the citizen deciding? Like, I had a guest on last year, a wonderful guest, but he said during the interview, well, I don't know about you, but I like all the taxes. I like the government handling my stuff. I was like, really? I don't actually. How has it gotten to the point where citizens kind of want to hand over their power to a centralized federal government to handle everything? Why has it become so popular?
I don't know. That sounds like Stockholm Syndrome to me.
Whoa. Yeah.
I mean, seriously. Obviously, that's a little hyperbolic, but seriously, I mean, why would we want this city 500? So in Maine, Washington D.C. is 500 miles away from us, and we're frankly closer to Washington D.C. than a lot of other states in this country. Why would we want this city 500 miles away, telling us how to live, telling us how to use the fruits of our labor? I think that most people understand that we know best our own lives. We know our own hopes, our own dreams, our own aspirations, and our own needs, and including for us and for our family. Washington, D.C. doesn't know us. Washington, D.C. doesn't know us as individuals. And even if they had the capacity to know us, they don't care to know us. They look at us all as one-size-fits-all people, too dumb to make our own decisions for our own lives. But you know what? No centralized government is ever going to be smart enough to know how to plan for us. Only we as individuals can plan for us in our own lives, because we're not one-size-fits-all people.
And essentially, that is why we created 3 branches of government, so that we would have a very diverse and many officials for the citizenry to be there, for their voices to be heard, to realize, okay, my set of people here, my constituents, this is their need. This is what they most need taken care of. And as you said, not one size fits all. What you might need in California, they don't have a lot of water in California. They have to have it shipped in. That's very important, to make sure that they're all have water to drink. That won't be a concern in other places that have water all over the place. So, it'll be different concerns, different issues depending on the state you're in.
Yeah, and I think that, our markets can handle those things oftentimes so much better than government. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that, well, geez, with problems this complicated, we need a strong central authority kind of issuing out commands to make sure everything kind of flows right. This centralized planning view of an economy. Yeah. But, we watched the Soviet Union and we saw that didn't work out so well. It's really, the beautiful thing about free markets is that we as individual people, just acting on our own self-interest, pursuing, what's important for us, we find ways to work together and to help each other. And in such a way that, because someone else, people who may not even know each other, people who may not even like each other if they met each other, are doing economic activity that mutually benefit each other.
And from your perspective, what is like the biggest issue facing the entire country, and what is your solution for it?
Well, we have so many problems, but I will say I think the biggest issue facing our country, because I think that this is a real existential problem that we face, is that we are bankrupt. 113 trillion in unfunded liabilities on top of 21 trillion in debt. As I think I said earlier, that's a bill of $1 million for every single American taxpayer. We have gone so far beyond the point of no return. There's no way this is ever going to be able to be paid off. So the first thing that we have to do when you find yourself in a hole is you have to stop digging. Let's do that first. We need to balance the budget. And in order to do that, we don't do that by stealing more from the American people. We don't do that by taking more from people's paychecks or borrowing more money or printing more money. We have to do that by getting the spending under control. And this is one of the problems that I see in Washington, D.C., is that both parties decry spending in different things, but also love spending on different things. Democrats always want to do more welfare spending, and Republicans always want to do more warfare spending. And so they compromise and they come together and they say, okay, the fix for this is we're going to spend more on everything, more warfare spending, more welfare spending. And that's how we've gotten into this hole that we're in. If we're going to balance the budget, we need to look at cutting spending in both places. Maybe we need to start to ask the question, can we really afford these multi-trillion-dollar wars that we've been fighting for, the last 20 years? Can we really afford that? And can we afford to keep expanding these entitlement programs in such an unsustainable way, to the point where now Medicare and Social Security are being projected to be insolvent in the next few decades? And really, we've got some tough choices ahead.
Absolutely. Well, and I like better the fact of empowering people that they can actually go out there and make a decent living, and all their paycheck isn't going to just their groceries. Because I recall back when I first moved out, my $20 could buy a pretty big bag, maybe 2 bags of groceries. Right now, I'm lucky if I can walk out with 2 things from the grocery store. It's nuts. So, inflation, putting more money into the system has not helped. But one thing here also, how do we balance it where we balance things, but at the same time make sure our soldiers and our branches of the military are have the money they need? Now, I'm thinking, because I've heard in the government you could buy a toilet seat and it's like costs outrageous, a couple $100 or something crazy. That there's no one being held accountable when things that are bought, even necessary things, are cost effective. And why is that?
Well, it's the way that the system is built. I was just talking the other day with a gentleman who used to work in the Department of Defense, and his job was to go through the budget and find unspent money so that it could be spent. They called it burning the money. Whoa. All right. So, and he was very good at his job. He would go and say, hey, there's $600,000 here that's kind of in various accounts that hasn't been spent. All right, let's find ways to spend it right now. They spend it on things they don't need, because if that money goes unspent, they won't be able to ask for more money in the next budget. Wow. And so this is the really flawed way our system is working. And this isn't just on military spending. This is in every department of government. This is how government works. You spend it or you lose it. So we're not incentivizing people to save money. We're incentivizing our government to waste it. So one of the things we can do, this is actually a proposal that Senator Rand Paul has put forward, and I think it's a good idea, is you empower individuals within the bureaucracy. If they know of wasteful spending going on, let them identify it, and if that results in savings, that they could get a portion of that savings as a bonus for themselves, so that we actually can reverse the incentive structure and reward people who help us save taxpayer money. That's one thing we can do. But we also need to look at, we're not just going to be able to get the spending under control by just tinkering around the edges. We actually have to have the government has to do less stuff. Part of the reason we spend so much money is because we expect the government to do so much. I mean, we've been in countless wars these last 20 years. And of course, when you're, in Afghanistan for 17 years, that's going to cost a lot of money. I think we need to reevaluate some of these wars. We also need to reevaluate some of the welfare spending.
Wow, that is a heavy trigger. But, if you think about it, as citizens, even myself, a number of years ago, I had gotten in a sticky situation where I'd overspent. And it was a good friend of mine that, said, I think we need to chat. And I'm like, why? He's like, I think you're overspending. Every time I see you, you have shopping bags. And at that point in time, it was probably 10 years ago, I was kind of depressed. And she made me open all my credit card bills, and we went over it. And I thought I owed $12,000. I owed $26,000. And I immediately cut my credit cards, came up with a plan on how I'm going to actually budget and use my money and use nothing else and pay down my debt. And I did, in I think 2 years' time. But the point is, that's what it takes for the government and each individual citizen to actually be honest about where you're spending. Because if the government's doing, I'm sure a lot of Americans are also still doing that, where you're taking more than you have coming in and spending it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And sadly, so much of the policies that we have in Washington, D.C. encourage that. We tell people the importance of saving and being frugal with their personal finances. And yet at the same time, you have the Federal Reserve, our central bank, artificially lowering interest rates to a point where it discourages people from saving, because the inflation is going so quickly that if you try to save for the future, you're actually losing money, because the value of your dollar is being diminished. So we say that it's a good value, but then our policies don't reflect that.
Yeah. So what can citizens do to change that? Should they write to their congressmen, their senators? What's the stance that citizens can take to resolve this?
Well, I'll say this. I think that constituents have a lot of power, more power than we realize. I remember when I was in the state Senate, I sponsored and we passed a law called constitutional carry, giving Maine people back their Second Amendment rights. And you know what? It passed because people back home called and emailed and let their legislators know, regardless of what that legislator's individual's views were, they let their legislators know they wanted them to do the right thing and restore their freedoms, or they weren't going to get reelected. So that makes a difference. So yes, call and email your legislators, and if you're worried about if you're worried about spending, if you're worried about the unsustainable financial course we're on, if you're worried about anything at all, if you're worried about the continual erosion of our constitutional freedom, call and email and let your representative and your senator know. And if they don't respond, if they don't vote in a way that promotes freedom and liberty, then vote them out. get rid of them.
That's right. And we do have more power. And it's funny how people forget that. But there was a state, I think in Texas, that did an experiment. I think the citizens were just plain old sick of people who were being elected, I think, to their city council. So everyone voted for Mickey Mouse or something like that. But it was to send a message. Start giving us people we can vote for because we're sick of this crap and we ain't taking it anymore. We want people that reflect our needs, our wants, and our values.
Absolutely. And the power is really in our hands. You know, we have a lot of power in the system. We just have to learn how to use it and make a difference.
That's right. Where can people in Maine, and as well as outside of Maine, support your campaign as well as get involved in your campaign?
Well, I'll say this. Anyone who would like to chip in financially and help support a constitutional voice in Washington, D.C., you can go to ericbrakey.com and chip in 25, 50, 5, 10, any amount that you can afford makes a big difference, especially in a small state like Maine. It goes a very long way. You can also follow me on Facebook at Eric Brakey for U.S. Senate, or on Twitter or Instagram at Senator Brakey.
Well, this has been such a fabulous talk. I thank you so much, Eric, for all the great work you're doing. We need more senators and congressmen out there with true value to serve the people and not themselves, because that's what a public servant does. They serve the people. And I'm so grateful that you're one of those service officials that are out there serving the people. Thank you so much for all the work you do, Eric.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming to Savvy Business Radio.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina at SavvyBusinessRadio.com.